Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and that means Friday Reads. I participated in Friday Reads last week, and I felt like a real booktuber. At long last, I felt like a real booktuber. I was talking about books that I have read recently, books that I'm currently reading, books that I'm going to read very soon, and that is the whole point of Friday Reads. To give a kind of depth charge, an illumination of the landscape in an instant. Where are you in your reading now as opposed to last week? Or the last time you did a weekly report or a regular report of any kind. I love that sort of thing. With my bookish friends, IRL, off of BookTube, that is the first thing that I ask. How's the reading coming? What are you reading? And Friday Reads is a way that BookTube does that. But I've always thought that it was partially, that I was partially too cool for Friday Reads because of two things. One is that I read very fast. I read a lot more than most people do. Fortunately, the ranks of BookTube have swelled now with all kinds of readers, from really slow and meditative readers to normal speed readers to fast readers. There are plenty of all. And the swelling of the ranks with all those different kinds of readers. We have plenty of rereaders. We have people who read new things only. We have people who read favorites. We have people who are constantly challenging their own comfort zones. And we have slow, medium, and fast readers. And now that we have that variety, it has either taught us all very slowly to accept that variety, or we were all people accepting of that variety and we're the ones who made it up. One way or the other, we have that reflected in everybody's different Friday Reads. If you are doing a Friday Reads and you are a slow reader, and you've got one book done this week, or you're still working on the same two books that you were working on last week, we all still want to hear about it. There isn't going to be any snickering. And the same thing with fast readers. But I had an out last week, and I have an out this week to put me squarely in the spectrum of a real booktuber. So I thought I'd go through some of the books that I've read this week. This has been an excellent week for reading. Excellent. Despite the fact that I have gone out almost every day to go shopping at the Brattle Bookshop. I've managed to make up for lost time. So this has been an excellent week for reading. I've also, to assuage my guilt just a bit at all those Brattle Bookshop trips, I've done a large amount of reading inroads into the books that I've been buying at the Brattle. I have not been just buying them and chucking them on the shelf. But anyway, I assembled some pictures here. I don't have any actual books. I assembled some pictures to show you things that I have been reading or that I'm going to read or that I am reading. Like, for instance, there's this one. This is by Christina Grosinger and Harlan Patch. This is The Lives of Bees, an oversized hardcover illustrated edition from Princeton University Press, I believe. Weak binding, but really good full-color reproductions of the world of bees and what they do and how they do it and what they look like while they're doing it. I thought it was fascinating to page through. It was a little bit awkward. It was a little bit awkward to do. Big picture books like that, I didn't think of them as awkward, and they haven't changed. I've changed. Because I now know what technology should do, what it can do, and what it should be able to do. With a book like that, of course, you want to be able to pinch and zoom the artwork, the photography. You want to be able to pinch and zoom that. And on a static printed paper book, you can't. On an ebook, you could, but the ebook version of that would be a PDF, and they are incredibly clunky. And there are limitations because of your device. There shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. This device ought to be this device. And I ought to be able to touch two fingers at either corner of that little device, that little 6-inch device, and just expand the thing as big as I want. With memoried plastic as its millimeter thick border. I should be able to expand it to what I want and then expand it back. So that I can make this thing the size of a window pane to examine the artwork and then put it back to the size that I want. Do I want this size because I'm looking at comic books? Or do I want 6 inches and maybe smaller because I'm just reading the page of a paperback book? Do I want it to be e-ink? Or do I want it to be nice, vibrant color? Maybe I want e-ink because I want to take it easy on my eyes. All of those controls should be on this thing. It's 2024. All of those things should be here. I should be able to make this any size that I want, shrink it back to any size that I want, and change its mode of presentation to anything that I want. at all. Anything that I want. But I can't because it's 2024. So I read this. I read the physical copy that I have, and I liked it very much. The problem wasn't the design, because I have been reading big books like this my whole life. They are my default setting. I am familiar with this setting. I am now tempted by things that technology could do if the tech world cared about reading. It doesn't. But if it did, these things would be miracles. No, the real problem with The Lives of Bees wasn't the book. The book is really good. The real problem was that ant book that I read just recently. God. Oh my God, well, I don't remember the name. All right, well, in this way also I am a typical Friday Reads booktuber, because there are vital facts that I have not prepared. But I think you know what I mean. I wrote a review of it. I recently got an illustrated little book, a third the length of this thing, about what bees do, what red ant bees do in their life. And it was illustrated in a weird way. They were not photographs. They were three-dimensional art representations made from photographs. And it was astounding. The book was just astonishing. I read it at the time thinking this is easily the best natural history book that I've read so far this year. But what I wasn't taking into account when I read that is how static it would make all other books of its type look. All I want now is a bee book like that ant book. That's all I want. But it was still really, really good. Then we have Joseph Riley. This is Of Books and Men. I've shown you this a couple of times before. This is a century-old collection of this guy's occasional prose for writing what he thinks about Pushkin, what he thinks about Racine, what he thinks about Montaigne, or anything like that. The author's a bit of a windbag, and I knew that going in because I've read selections from this book before. I enjoyed the reread a lot more. I got into the mind frame a lot more this time. I don't know why that was, but I very much enjoyed it. There was absolutely no new ground broken, none whatsoever, not even in the meditative sense, none whatsoever. But I enjoyed it. It very much is a keeper for the tall bookcase that I have for books about books and books, essays and prefaces and whatnot. Then we have something by Martin Barron. I may have shown you this. I think that I missed it when it first came out. I just recently found a copy, so I read it. It is Collisions of Power: Trump, Jeff Bezos, and the Washington Post. I went into this bristling. I don't like Trump books. I don't like anyone trying to make money off this racist, sexist, fascist, lying moron, adjudicated rapist, convicted felon. I don't like anyone making money off him. I say moratorium with books until 2047 when he dies in the residence of the West Wing. Moratorium books until then. Until then, you are making money off the downfall of the American experiment. But I thought I'd read it anyway. I have a long history with the Washington Post, lots and lots of familiarity with the Post. In two separate periods in my life, I have had the pleasure of writing for the Washington Post. That's pretty amazing. And it was great time. It was a great experience both times. So I read this. Now, I'm not going to indulge in conspiracy thinking. I often like to indulge in conspiracy thinking with you, and I won't. Those of you who have any familiarity with Donald Trump, especially long-term familiarity going back to his early days in New York City, will automatically distrust an author with the name Barron. Donald Trump has been lying about being someone named Barron for the whole of his adult life, and actually named his son, Melania's son, the 7-foot-tall one that doesn't look like Trump at all, who was conceived with the wife that Trump bought after he divorced his second wife, who was conceived despite the fact that Trump cannot generate sperm. So he could not conceive a son. He can't. He's infertile and he's incapable of growing hair on his body. But nevertheless, we'll say his for the sake of a future Reich, for the sake of a reign of one person in America that is going to last literally 100 years. A record-breaking reign in terms of its duration. Trump went even so far as to name his son Barron, and it's a name like the letter X is for another psychopath, Elon Musk. It's just a fixation, And if you're a man baby who's never told no your entire life, you will just indulge your fixations at any chance you get. So you will take an extremely worldwide known branded company and you'll rename it. You'll rename it. You'll give it a rename that no one uses, even now, a year or two later, that no one uses it because you're a lunatic and people are just waiting for you to sell it, and so that it can be rebranded, rebranded. Nevertheless, I won't indulge in conspiracy theory thinking, and I will also say that to the best of my ability, Martin Barron is a real person, is not Donald Trump. But that's about the extent of the credence that I'm lending to this book. I don't know quite how to summarize the reading experience here. The reading experience was twofold. One part of the reading experience is a testament to Martin Barron's writing ability. This is a terrific read. Just terrific. The pages fly by. That's one part of the reading experience, and it's perfectly fine to acknowledge that. I loved reading it. And the other part of the reading experience is I don't believe a single word of what's in this book. Not one single word. I don't want a guest on a Talking Head MSNBC spot to come on and talk about this book. What I want is for Martin Barron to provide me with the audio and videotaped evidence of everything, every claim that he has in this book. Anytime in this book, there are many times in this book where he is present for conversations. I want corroboration, or I don't believe they happened the way he describes them. And the times when he is alone with the subject of the conversation, not a chance in hell. He might as well have talked to Napoleon Bonaparte. I didn't believe a word of what was in this book. And it was also, I don't want to say partisan, because you can't hate Donald Trump enough. You could have hated him enough in 2018. But if he wants to organize an armed insurrection to overthrow the government and just do away with your vote, you're mine now. You're my slave now. You don't have a vote. You don't get to do what you want. You have to do what I or a member of my family wants. After that, you can't be biased enough for me against Donald Trump, an enemy to everything that America is and everything that America stands for. But you have to have grounding for it, right? You have to have grounding for it. In 2018, I might have said that, but I would have acknowledged that I didn't have grounding for it. After the coup attempt on January 6th, I have grounding for the fact that he does not want America to be a representative democracy. After the last year, I have grounding for my contention that he wants to be a dictator, that he wants to do away with laws. I could have inferred that from him telling some flunky news person that he really admired how the dictator of North Korea's people sit up and come to attention when he speaks, and that he wants my people to be like that. I could have inferred it from that comment, but it wasn't completely direct. Now it's completely direct. So it's not that. It's not that this is a Trump bashing book. It's the hypocrisy of it, because the Post is done very well from Trump bashing, and they also are careful about how they do it. Now they are careful about how they do it in a way that they absolutely don't need to be, that they shouldn't be, unless they're feathering their nest against what's coming. It angered me. The book angered me. I doubt that I will keep it. I like to keep histories and memoirs of great American newspapers, the three remaining great American newspapers. I like to keep histories and memoirs of those. I find it inherently interesting. I was part of that world for a long time. I don't know that I'll keep this one, though. I don't see the value in it. I don't trust Martin Barron. That's the simple way to put it. As an author. I'm not saying personally. I don't know him personally. And I'm also not saying experientially. I don't think I've ever read anything by him until I read this book. I'm talking about the experience of reading this book. As I was reading it, I was thinking, I don't trust you. What on earth? No. Anyway, let's move from contention to something that I haven't read yet. Titan Books, Asleep at the Wheel, has not sent me a copy of Conan, City of the Dead by John Hocking. This has, I think, 2 Conan novellas that are heavily illustrated. I don't know if City of the Dead might be the name of one of the novellas, but this is new Conan pastiche fiction, me wanty, but Titan Books has not sent it. So I may have to be reduced on Monday to the status of a common bridge troll by asking them. Don't they know who I am? They probably have no idea that I'd be interested, but I will give it a try. Then we have a reread. This was by Rod Paschal. I got this just the other day at one of the innumerable Brattle visits that I've been making recently. This is The Defeat of Imperial Germany, part of a series, the Major Battles and Campaigns series, edited by John Eisenhower. And I read this once before in connection with a class. I thought the second time around this was just amazing. It's just crystalline concision. Just wonderful concision. I have read books 4 times this length about just a few months, just in the preparation for the war. I have read books 4 times this length on just the Somme, or just a handful or one battle. This thing is a svelte 250 pages and is wonderful. An electric reading experience. Just loved it. Then we have a work of translated fiction. I just have the picture here, so I don't know the name of the translator. We've seen it a couple of times on this channel. I finally got around to reading it. From the folks at Europa Editions, this is Valerie Perrin's book, Forgotten on Sunday, about a care worker in an old folks' home in a senior center who meets a 100-year-old person in that home who has a very interesting story to tell. It's not just that it's coherent, which separates it from all the other stories in the house, but also that it impinges on the person, the narrator herself, in ways that get more and more outlandish and more documented as they go along. I thought this was fairly good. It had the drawback, the number one drawback for any translated literature for me, fiction or nonfiction, is if at some point along the line I start to wonder, was that you or was that the translator? You know what I mean? You're reading along and you're thinking, okay, this is you, the author. I have not read the original, but this is definitely you. Or, in the case of, for instance, Constance Garnett's translation of War and Peace, you're reading along and you're thinking, this is you, the translator. So, whether or not I'm getting the author here is a moot point. I am getting you, the translator, and you are not dropping out of your own voice at any point. So, this is you ventriloquizing the author. I'm not explaining this well. The literature and translation is a bugaboo of mine. I absolutely love it. I want consistency in either one of those things. I want it to be consistent in one of those two ways. It's the inconsistency that kills me. If I'm reading along a couple of chapters, and I'm thinking, okay, this is you, the author, and the translator is out of the room. And then I hit a patch and I think, oh, wait, is the translator here? That doesn't sound like you. There's been a tonal shift. That sounds like the translator. Like someone else is involved in this process. Well, I don't like that. And by the same token, if I'm reading through a book and I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't know anything about this author, but this sounds like the translator. The bio note on the author is saying that he's 65 years old and he was born in, the south of France. The translation reads like someone who's 30 years old and was born in Brooklyn. And that's okay, provided that's what I'm getting. Then this is that 30-year-old Brooklynite ventriloquizing the original book. Okay, fine, unless it changes. Unless all of a sudden that tonal register changes. And that happened a couple of times in this book in ways that made me semi-want to read the original. I was not captivated by this enough to hunt out the original and read it. There have been many books in the Europa lineup that have made me do that, but not this one. Although, one of the elements that I wasn't expecting, that was much stronger in the book than the book's description led me to believe, is the sadness of these buildings, these warehouses where we put our old people. All sorts of different price ranges and all sorts of different amenities and services. We just put them there. And it's the staff that takes care of them. It's not their loved ones who take care of them. Their loved ones barely visit in a lot of cases. It's the staff who has to deal with them regressing into a second childhood, deal with their increasing dementia, deal with spite or bitterness or displaced anger. And this book captures all of that really well. It's very depressing. That is very depressing. I used to walk regularly. You could actually stop the sentence right there, but no. I used to walk regularly by one of these places, and it had bay windows in the front, right on the sidewalk. There weren't hedges. They weren't raised up above the sidewalk at all. They were right at sidewalk level. So you could just look right in at these people sitting in their chairs, just housed there. A lot of the time that I looked at those people, I got the strong impression that the only reason they were slumped in defeat like that is because they don't have anything to do. There's nothing wrong with their minds. There's plenty wrong with their bodies, but there's nothing wrong with their minds. They just don't have anything to do. Maybe macular degeneration has made it impossible for them to read. Maybe they find their cohorts, who are also imprisoned in these buildings, every bit as boring as anybody else would. Maybe they don't have any stimulation. Of the few times that I have proctored book groups in senior centers or retirement centers like this, that has been the impression I've got, is that a large percentage, maybe not 50%, but a large percentage of the people in these populations just don't have any stimulation. They don't have any reason to be interested. They just atrophy. Your brain will atrophy if you don't use it. I used to walk by those windows and feel a great surge of irritation because in most cases, I would argue in most cases, the families of those people could easily have them in the home where they do have stimulation, where they aren't just rusting into nothing. Some of them have serious mental issues or medical issues, so granted, you can't have them in the home, but plenty of them don't. They're just put there for convenience. We can't be bothered. We can't. This is too much. So, because you can't go up the stairs anymore, this is too much. Maybe I'm just being a little thin-skinned on the subject because more times than I can count in my life, although I actually do know the number, I have been a senior caretaker for someone who was once a piston of energy, someone who was once a pillar of non-sleeping energy and activity, interested in everything, involved in everything. And then suddenly, or not suddenly, slowly, gradually, more and more food disagrees with them. More and more care has to be taken with the food and the water. Maybe there are accidents. Stairs become impossible. Maybe even getting up on the bed becomes impossible without help. Maybe walks become a problem, a big problem sometimes. There's forgetfulness. There's panic at forgetfulness. It's the same thing. Those are all the same thing, regardless of species. I've done that. I've been that caretaker many, many, many times. It never occurred to me to warehouse anybody. It never occurred to me to say this is not my problem anymore. And this book certainly is not about that. It does not mean to lecture on that subject, but oh my God, it's all over this thing. That hit me harder than the actual plot, which I guess is a condemnation of the book, but it was effectively done. And then we have Roderick Beaton. This was a new paperback that we got. And I'd already read the advanced copy and I read the hardcover. I reviewed the book and I got the paperback and I dipped my toe in a bit. I thought, yeah, this will work for a reread, definitely, but maybe not now. I dipped my toe in a bit and then flittered away, and I flittered back. This week I flittered back to The Greeks, A Global History, which I loved. I love the paperback even more. This matured in my mind in the time since I read and reviewed it. I really, really enjoyed it. As a one-volume history of the Greeks from their earliest times, their proto-mythological times, to their heyday, then another heyday, then a long decline. It's a terrific work of popular history to read. Then a work of romance, a romance novel, a Regency romance novel. This is The Groom List by Ella Quinn. I think this is the third book in a series, but she's so good at encapsulating each book so that you don't need to read the series in order at all. And this is about the young hero, the titled young hero of the book, has a land-grabby father. He has a grabby fingers father who wants everything. Wants all the money, all the property, all the titles, including the ones that would go to the main character if he marries. He doesn't feel like marrying, of course. Who does? Sorry. Sorry, all you married men out there. He doesn't want to marry, but he wants to hold on to what's his. And naturally, in the course of the novel, true love blossoms. But I love Ella Quinn. I thought this was just wonderful. I would like to have a physical copy. I'd like to have a paperback copy of it. That would be great. It's again, somebody either asleep at the wheel or maybe thinking I'm dead. Every year that passes, actuarially, is more and more reason to think I'm dead, but I'm not. I'm not. I'm still reading. Then we have something I've mentioned before. I've been working on this book. This is one of the books on the list that I can proudly proclaim is a work in progress. I never get to say that usually because I read books in one sitting. Almost always, I read books in one sitting. I do nothing but read. Except for when the Bean and I are out for WALK, I do nothing but read. So, I'm not, in that sense, I'm not like a lot of other readers where I'm not working on a book. I'm almost never doing that. And it isn't true in this case either. I read this book from front to back, but now I am working on it. Now I am chasing down sources and pondering, rereading certain parts, certain elements. This is by Nicholas Jenkins, and it is The Island, which is the subtitle and the cover make it look like an Auden book. And to an extent it is, but it's much more than that. It's much more broad-ranging than that. And Auden is by far the only poet who is extremely well treated in this book. It's extremely readable. It's really, really good. I'm, again, waiting for a finished copy to really dig into it. But I've been digging into it anyway. This has been a project of mine where, as a palate cleanser for getting some crappy new piece of fiction and blowing right through it and thinking, the whole world is ending. You'd think that. Then I go to this and just dig into a chapter or 2 or 3 again. And once I get the finished copy, I will reread the whole thing from front to back. But I was just about to sail into a sales pitch, but I don't know who I would recommend this to. I guess, well, a lot of the poets who are mentioned in here, the famous World War I poets, the interwar poets, there are a lot of fans of those people, right? There are a lot of fans of those people on BookTube. If you're a fan of that period, those type of people, even a fan of Auden himself, I don't know of many outspoken Auden fans on our little corner of BookTube, but this would definitely appeal. Certainly appeal to you in the way it's done. It's really well done. I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for the finished copy. I'm waiting for finished copies of a few things. Like a common bridge troll. But anyway, then we have George Bradley. This is a new translation, selection and translation of the later poetry of Eugenio Montale. Late Montale is the name here. It's a thin thing. It starts on a faulty premise. It starts on a premise that I don't really agree with. The translator here is pretty much agreeing with the poet himself, who naturally, he was a showman. He was a salesman for his own work. He praised his later work. There's a split. There's almost a binary split in his career, Montale's career. And the back half of it, critics have often said, this is nothing. These are poems. Sure, he's putting out little books, but they're nothing. There's nothing to them at all. And Montale famously said that there is a tonal difference, and he knows that the first half of his career was written in dress shoes, and the second half of his career is written in pajamas. Okay, well, I definitely see that. He's not wrong about that. This was a poet who was wrong about very little. I definitely see that. He's not wrong about that. But is that good? Is that really good? I don't think so. I've never really thought so about the later poems by this poet. And this translator, not only, he translates these, they're very easy to translate. They're not hard. There's no complexity to them at all. That's what you get. If you make poems in your pajamas, that's what you get. If you do them in your house slippers. There's nothing complex. The translation itself, this was not an instance where I felt like the translator was in the room. No, not at all. The more the merrier. It was getting a little lonely in here with just the poems on their own. No, it's not that. It's that the translator here seems to agree with his subject that these poems are as good as the poems from the first half of Montale's career, and they're not. They're just not. I mean, I went to it with an open mind. I thought, I think we saw this, I think I opened this in the mail, and my thought was, well, okay, no one has ever said that, no one claims that, but if you're going to claim that, also, no one's ever claimed it, and also it's self-evidently wrong. But if you're going to claim that, well, okay, I'll go into the wide open mind. If you want to convince me, then go right ahead. I will not be mulish if you convince me, if you can show me. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. I'm very glad to have it. I'm very glad that a new translation exists. I would like very much a big, fat, collected Montale in a new translation, new introduction, new notes, all of it. if this is a stepping stone in the direction of that, more power to it, but it did not convince me. These things are trifles. Most of them are trifles. Now that I don't have to worry about the author punching me, I'm free to say that. Then we have something, oh my. I will be reading this again. This Friday Reads marks reading number 2 for this book, and I'm going to be reading it again. It's extremely thought-provoking, and the more you dig into it, the more thought-provoking it gets. This is by John Adams and Edmund Ramsden, and it's called Rat City. And it is a dual study of a guy who tried to create a utopian habitat for rats, for wild rats, and the people and the philosophies behind housing projects for humans. And when I got this originally, I thought, that is explosive. That is more explosive than it sounds. If you sit down and think about that for a minute, that gets more and more explosive the more you think about it. But, oh my God, the more I read it, the more explosive it got. Oh my God. I honestly don't know what some of the pioneers of low-cost urban housing development centers, high-rise housing and whatnot, the Lucy Larkhams of the world. I honestly don't know what they would make of this book if you could dig them up or return them from the darkest pits of hell and make them read this. But I have to say, the person I most want to read this is Jordan Parsons, who isn't even on BookTube anymore. I don't know if he's ever lived in a high-rise. I've never lived in urban housing. But Jordan knows what rats are like. He's lived with them. He's lived with lots of them. He knows what they're like. He knows what they like their living conditions to be like and what they don't like them to be like. Of course, the dumb myth that he would probably scorn dispelling, and I will happily dispel, is the myth that you yourself might believe, which is that rats are furtive, creepy little creatures that like to skulk around in the dirt and the filth. They don't. They don't. Any more than pigs do. They don't. That's what happens to them in a compressed urban environment. They enter into what this book calls repeatedly a stressed environment, and they act accordingly. Humans do the same thing in maximum security prisons. And also in urban high-rise development projects. Oh my God. Every time I thought this book was going to give me a little hole that, much like a fleeing rat, I could scoot through, it closed that hole. I never got a chance. I never got any relief from this book, and I didn't want any either, because it's brilliantly done. I'm not describing it. I'm describing it elliptically, but I loved it. I loved it. I will attempt to write about this book. I wish I could convince Jordan Parsons to write about it, though. I don't think he watches videos anymore on BookTube. He certainly doesn't make them anymore. I was thinking about him the whole time that I was reading this, and I was fascinated. Just fascinated. The skill that these two authors have in telling the story, this could easily have been a dry monograph about urban dynamics, animal or human. Instead, it's riveting. Just riveting. And it will make you, it wants to ask questions. It wants you to ask questions about what it means to live an unstressed life. What good living conditions are, and where they fall on a spectrum, and what that spectrum is. It means to make you ask those questions. But it's going to make you ask deeper questions as well. What the heck are we doing with cities? What is housing? What is that? What do we actually want, and how seldom have we ever seen it? I don't know. I have always described myself as an essentially urban person. I have lived in the country. I have lived deep in the country where there was no one around at all. I have lived in farm country for extended periods of time. And I am able to access the joys and beauties of it, definitely. They're not lost on me at all. But I prefer an urban setting. It's noisier. It's more crowded, yes. But I want more people around me, not fewer people. And I don't know if that's true anymore now that I've read this thing. I'm going to read it again. I don't know if I'm going to get a finished copy of this. I'll have to put inquiries out. I'm not going to put any inquiries out on the Friday of a short week. So I'll do it all on Monday. I'll do all these inquiries on Monday. But it was fascinating. Then we have a reread. This was Charles Braceland Flood. This was Rise and Fight Again. A military history of the American Revolution, but not the same kind of military history as the defeat of Imperial Germany. This is far more novelistic, far more impressionistic, lots and lots of people wrote the American Revolution to a fare thee well. Everyone wrote letters. Everyone wrote diary accounts. Everyone wrote accounts all the time. Enlisted men on both sides kept accounts. Everyone knew they were dealing with something historical. They didn't know how historical, but they knew it. And it is easily possible to break down the conventions in which those accounts were written and revive them as a kind of quasi-novelistic approach. And Flood does that really well all throughout. This is just so gripping to read. I have many, many books on this particular subject. I've read many, many books on this particular subject that I don't still have. But I'm so glad. I just recently found a brand new copy of this without the sticker on. This is just taken from the internet. I just recently found a brand new copy of this in perfect condition, like the day it was made. And that's the copy that I reread. I don't have an e-copy of this. I don't know if this exists as an e-copy, but I loved it. Just loved it. It doesn't have any historical valence, not in any real way. I mean, you look at a book like Almost a Miracle by John Ferling, which I also just recently got, which is on the same subject. You'll see what I mean right away. Flood is not trying to do what Ferling is trying to do. He's trying to entertain you. He's trying to tell. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing inaccurate about it. But he's trying to entertain the person who has not built up their history reading muscles, and he does a great job of that. Then we have something we've seen before. I'm waiting for a finished copy of this as well. This is Ray Kurzweil, and this is The Singularity is Nearer. When we merge with AI. This is the author of The Singularity is Near, that was written 70 years ago, and none of which his predictions have come true, although all of Ray Kurzweil's boosters will say that all of his predictions have come true. And this book just goes further about what AI and nanotechnology, there's a lot on nanotechnology, will do in the future. What it will be like. It'll be just normal. Oh yeah, oh, this is shocking you? Oh no, let me shock you a little more. I love science fiction world building. A lot of newcomers to science fiction, especially literary snobs, are baffled by science fiction world building. They'll take world building literally dressed out at 300 pages in Proust, but they won't take even 10 pages of it in science fiction. In 10 pages of it in science fiction, they're saying, this seems rather maladroit. But nevertheless, I love it. I love science fiction world building. And that's basically what this is. The only way you can read this book without getting angry at it, and who would want to get angry at a book? The only way you can read this book without getting angry at it is to simply take it as science fiction world building. Because it bears almost no relation to the real world. And I'm not just talking about the advances in the technology. Kurzweil might be right about some of his projections along those lines. I'm talking about the world that this takes place in. This is the world in which these advances in AI and nanotechnology are happening is a world without greed, without venality, without resource hoarding by the rich, without Trump, without Trumpism, without science denialism. There are no flat earth believers in this world. No religious fundamentalists who would wreck all of these labs because they want to return to the 8th century or the 8th century BC. There's none of that. This all takes place against a backdrop of a world that is curious about all this stuff and perfectly welcomes it. And won't hoard it or use it for its own ends. So, okay, fine. You want to give me The Singularity is Nearer as a work of science prognostication is ridiculous. It's borderline ridiculous. But The Singularity is Nearer as one of the founding documentaries of the United Federation of Planets, fine. Fine, absolutely. You read it as science fiction world building, you'll be fine. And then finally, we can finish with another book that I am working on. Steve is so glowingly proud of the books that he's working on because it makes him a real booktuber. I'm not just talking about things that I have read or things that I'm going to read. I'm also talking about things I'm working on. I almost never get to do that. This is not technically an example of that because I have read through this. Both of my examples technically don't work, but I am working on it. I am living in it and mulling around in it, getting ready for another book that'll probably be in next Friday's Friday Reads. This is The Letters of Tom Gunn. And it's big. It's a huge book. And it's full of stuff, just full of letters. Collections tend to have unacknowledged, unnoticed themes running through them. You have to read them and then reread them to get that. You can't go in expecting them. You won't know what you're looking for. The publisher was kind enough to send me a copy of this in an adjacent matter to the big new biography of Tom Gunn that comes out this month. or next month, June. Comes out in June. A Big Queer Life or something like that. I don't remember the exact subtitle of it, but it's a big biography of Tom Gunn. And the first full dress thing. I've read a biographical treatment of him that was written a few years ago, and there are a couple of biographical treatments that are coming out this spring and summer. I guess we're in summer, aren't we now? May is almost over, so we're in summer. There are gonna be a few Tom Gunn titles coming out. I will read them all, but I've been, aside from the poetry, the collected poetry, this really is the thing to read before you read any of those things. For me, you not so much. I will report whether or not the new biography, it needs you to have something read first before you read it. That would be bad. That would be a very bad thing. But I don't know that yet. But for me, this is the place to start, because all of them are based on this. Not necessarily the letters, but the man, and the man is nowhere better conveyed than in this big version. This big collection of letters is amazing. Just amazing. So, when it first came out, I flew right through it, but I've been living with it this week. So that definitely counts for Friday Reads. So there you go. That's a thumbnail sketch of my Friday Reads. So some of the books that I have read, some of the books that I am working on now, and some of the books that I will be reading in the next week. Not a full list, but some. This was, 10 books? And we're at almost an hour long. Right? If I had done every book that I read in May. Ugh. So anyway, I'll stop here except for my usual urgings for Friday Reads, which is tell me what you're doing. Tell me what your Friday Reads is like. I would love to hear. What has your reading week been like? Has it been bad? Have you had other things on your mind? Have you had obligations, or have you had plenty of time to read? And if so, what? I know that a lot of you are looking forward to the weekend. Not because you get time off from work, but because the weekend starts a whole bunch of great BookTube events. And it's true. A whole bunch of great BookTube events start in June. There's June on the Range, of course. There's Dune in June. There's Book Trek starts in June. And there are others, too, that I'm sure I'm leaving out. But those are the three big ones on my mind because I'm directly involved in all three of them. But it's not here yet. They're not here yet. Instead, how's your week gone for reading? And what are you looking forward to? Like, for instance, when it comes to those BookTube events, they all start tomorrow. Have you already decided that you're going to be contouring a lot of the next week's reading along those lines? And if so, tell Steve all about it. Anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.